So this is a brief tutorial about using Premiere. We need to remember that Premiere uses the media files as reference files. And so our best practices is for every project is to have a project folder, put our media in there, and we will want to save our sequence in this folder as well. That way it always stays connected. Now I cheat a little bit over here with my sound effects file, and I want to use it for all of the projects, and I don't want to be able to copy it. It's like 2 gigs, so I don't want to copy it in every folder. So I'll import my sound effects from here, and then it'll always stay connected. When we open up Premiere, we can work in different windows. I typically just stay in editing and color. I'm going to double click in our bin to import our media. We generally want to start with a dailies folder, so I'm going to hold down the shift key, select them all, and drag those files into a new sequence. You'll see that it creates a sequence inside our media folder, so we want to get that out of there. And so I'm going to just drag it out over here to free it so that we can close up our media folder. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to call it dailies. When we're inside the sequence, if we want to look at the whole sequence, all we have to do is hit the backslash. If we want to zoom in, we'll hit the equal key. If we want to zoom out, we'll hit the minus key. If we want to go from cut to cut, the up and down arrow will get us there. I like to organize my dailies by location or by scene, and I will leave those all butt up against each other so I can quickly scrub back and forth to find whatever I want my next shot to be. If there's a certain shot I like, I will change its label color. And so the shots that I think are like the best shots, then it makes that a little easier for me to get in there and decide. These blue markers tell the data where to go. It will generally default on V1 and V2, but if we wanted to import a file that's on top, then we would just make that selection and drag it, and that's how it'll happen. Command plus A will select all the shots. I press V and I click out of it to make it deselect. If you want to select a lot of data just to the right of your stream, you want to use Shift A, and right now the arrows are pointing to the left, so if I hit A again, it'll point to the right, and that will allow me to, also when these are selected, if you try to do up and down, it won't obey that rule because it's looking for that data on track 2. If it's turned off, it'll behave, but if we wanted to just do track 1, then we will select that for the up and down arrows. So there's no audio, so we can get rid of that. I'm going to hit Command A to select all. I'm going to hover over our file. I'm going to hit Control, unlink, and now we can delete this empty file. So if you hit Control and click, it'll ripple delete, bringing everything back to the left. I use that a great deal. If we go to the sequence settings, it'll tell us basically when you drag it into a new sequence, it will create that sequence around what the actual media is. And our media happens to be 1280 by 720, 23.976 frames per second. So that's fine. If we wanted to change that, this is the window where we would do it. When we export it, like even though if we are using 1280 by 720 and I ask you to create a 1080p file, it would be in the export version of that we would make our size differences. I'm going to drag in a song, and we can see that we can see the file. It's really hard to edit without being able to see that file, and if you ever lose this, if you go to the wrench tool, you will find that show audio waveform is what you need to do to see those waveforms. If you want to do a cut, press down C and create the cut. If you want to cut through everything, hold down the Shift key after you hit C, and it'll cut through all the files. Next, let's talk about effects, video effects. Next, we'll go to video effects. We're going to use video transitions, dissolve, dip to black on every one of our projects. I'm just going to drag it right in here, mute our sound. And we've got to fade up. If we want to make it longer, I just hover over there and I make it longer. If I want to make it shorter, we can adjust that. At the end of our project, we want to dip to black. For every project that we create at Gaylord College, we want to fade up and fade out to black. It's how we know the project's over. Ooh, there we go. We're not going to do a lot with video effects, but we can have some fun with blurs. I'm going to take a directional blur and I'm going to drop it onto this clip. And then up here we want to have our effects control on, and we see that we have our blur here. So I want to start with the blur and then change it to being sharp. So I'm going to walk into our file a little bit. I'm going to hit the keyframe, and it's going to be at 0 because we want it to be sharp at the end. Then we'll go to the beginning of the clip. 50 looks pretty good. And we see that we've got, this is our 0%, this is our 50%. We could goof around with the direction of this blur since it's a directional blur. So we'll do that, and then we'll take a look at what it does. And it does the trick, but it's taken way too long, so I'm just going to drag our keyframe to the left. Right about there is where I want it to be. Even more. Alright, that feels good. So that's how we keyframe an effect. Once we get into editing projects, we're going to be exporting the OMFs of all of our audio work out of Premiere so that we can import it into Audition. If you make these changes of audio levels, it'll keep those changes. If you create fade outs in the volume, it'll keep it. But I find that in Audition, its built-in fade out tool is much quicker to work with. So feel free to adjust levels and it'll remember that, but don't do too much tweaking in the audio. So when you're done with your picture edit and your basic sound editing, you're going to want to export an OMF. So you go File, Export, OMF. You'll give it a proper name. Right now, we want it to copy all the audio files. And this is going to work for almost all of our projects. We've got one that is too big for this to happen. And when that happens, what we do is we would tell it to trim to audio files, and then we'd tell it how many frames a handle that we'll want it to remember. But for most of our work, our most flexibility gives us by copying the whole audio files into the Premiere project. And so that's what we'll select. We will tell it where to go. And so I'm going to create a folder that's called Audition. And I'm going to export it right into there. And we'll see that the OMF is inside our folder. We don't need this. So that's how we export an OMF. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about color correction. We'll get into the color tool. The Lumetri scope is immensely useful in terms of setting up our basic balance. We'll go to Window, Lumetri Color, and open that up. And so if we have our file selected, that's when we can like white balance and make our exposure adjustments. Basically, when we want to do a basic adjustment where we've got our blacks touching our blacks and our whites just touching the tops of the whites, and then we want to shape it so that it looks about the same, and that's how we achieve our white balance. And so that's our basic color correction. And if you want to then copy that into other files, you'll just click on that, hit Command C, find another clip that you want to copy it into, and it will color it that way. But we'll see that because I shot this in shadow, the copy doesn't maintain the look. It would need to be somewhere in something with similar lighting for it to match. So in this one we'll want to reset it and go back from scratch to get our look. So after we get a basic color balance, the next step we want to do is to create a look that helps tell the story and the mood of the visuals. One way to do that is we'll go File, New, and we're going to create a adjustment layer. And we want that adjustment layer to be the same size as our video files. And I'm going to call it CC1, and I'm going to drag it on top. And I'm going to say that I want all of these shots to have the same look. And so then we'll click into that layer, and then we can start playing with interesting looks. For example, we could just go to the creative and pick some presets. That we think we might like. Let's pretend that this is the one I'm digging it. I could change its intensity. So that's my brief overview of using Premiere. I don't get into much of the details of it because I try to do a very simple style of editing. What's more important than knowing the software is knowing where to cut. And that's really what this course is all about.